My Life, My Way by Sophia Bothwell, available from Amazon and Lulu Online Publishing. Chapter 2. In the knowledge of who you are, you have the discipline and courage to carry out the agenda you set for yourself. Shirley MacLaine. Stage 2. After living together for 6 months, Colm's temporary job was finished, and another was nowhere to be seen. He, like so many other young Irish men at the time, decided to head for London, where, we had heard, there were jobs aplenty. Colm had a friend who was returning to London to work on the building sites. This time Colm would go with him, and I would follow 3 weeks later, once he'd found a job and somewhere to live. That was our plan. And as if the whole universe swept us up in support of our youthful dreams, his first night in London was spent in a rented room in Paddington. It was being paid for by the Social Security within a week. He found a labouring job by the next week, and by the third week, I walked into a travel agent's in Dundalk and bought a one-way ticket to London. At 6 a.m. on the 1st of May 1985, I was sitting obediently waiting for Colm in London's Euston train station. He arrived. I knew he would. Some things are just destiny. Some things are written in stone. This was one of those things. I was given a chance now, a chance to do something new, something risky, maybe even something grand. It's the principle of favourability. When you play cards for the first time, you are almost sure to win. Beginner's luck. Why's that? Because there is a force that whets your appetite, that wants you to realise your destiny. Paulo Coelho, author of The Alchemist. 3 weeks after I arrived in London, I had my first job, a humble catering appointment to be sure, but amazing to me nonetheless. For to an Irish country bumpkin, a home, albeit a one-bedroomed bedsit, and a job in one of the world's capital cities was quite fascinating. It all seemed to flow, and, as I was about to learn, things flowed real quick in London, and you had to discard anything about yourself that didn't float. It is true that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I was ready, and London was to be my teacher. At that time, I hadn't realised that a city could be such a phenomenon, a mother, friend, and mentor. I didn't know she would give birth to a new me by eating me up and spitting me out until I shaped up and really knew who I was in relation to her embrace. I don't know if I would have believed you if you'd told me that the next 12 years of my life would be spent here in London, my new hometown, with all its diversity and culture. Paradoxically, in all its cramped confines, she gave a person space enough to grow. It was as if she squeezed you until you sprouted something really worthwhile, given the fact that she claimed to provide the most interesting and fertile soil in which to sink your emerging roots. For growing roots is indeed an almost physical act, as any immigrant knows. And so my roots sank deep into this world capital city, the big smoke, with all her colleges and education centres and benefits for the underdog, free housing and jobs aplenty for the unskilled. She told you there was no excuse. She challenged you to become whoever you felt you might become if given half a chance. London gave you those chances and dared you to take her up on her offer of a life. Here you could get an education. Here you could join a night class in every conceivable subject under the sun, and there were even concessionary rates. You didn't need to speak English properly in this town to get a job, a stark contrast to the Irish recession of '84, where one job got 100 overqualified applicants. London encouraged you again and again to be all you could be. Like an insistent, firm, wise mother, she never let up. a designer-clad, good-looking, confident generation of new money, Cockney accents and yuppie types were proof that anyone, absolutely anyone, could achieve their dream if they set their minds and hearts on it and had the attitude, daring, and persistence to be who they wanted to be. A great training ground for a fledgling individual like me. Baker Street. I started to live in a world where mistakes were allowed. As the posh young twat whose daddy owned the lighting shop down Marylebone Road scoffed at the hunks of cold meat that were my first attempts at carving turkey. "We're not Harrods," explained my very camp Australian deli manager in my defence. Granted, the meat did look more like it had been pulled off the large bird with my teeth as opposed to being expertly sliced with the over a foot long carving knife that I was struggling to make friends with, as it is one of the most indispensable tools one can have in the delicatessen profession. However, it was my first day at work and it was all extremely new to me. My manager would also theatrically state, "If they want service with a smile, they can go to Harrods." We suspected a Harrods obsession. Basically, looking back on it, he practically gave me permission to be rude. But not having much expected of me and knowing that mistakes were understood and accommodated for as part of the learning process, we made headway. This new concept gave me the room to grow and also validated me. Even the tired, stressed out deli worker part of me that was not likely to smile at every customer that graced our prosperous little delicatessen counter. And so, London encouraged my first attempts at making a living, which meant being grown up and mastering the fine art of slicing smoked salmon and turkey wafer thin without slicing a finger off to boot. But most of all, I remember that summer being bright, bright and hot, with thunderstorms, and being amazed at the fact that we could actually use the electric slicing machine in the thunderstorm, my manager reassuring me that I could still get home on the Circle line, as London Underground was not in the habit of coming to a complete standstill just because of a lightning flash or two. I was used to seeing my mother and father unplugging every plug from every socket in the farmhouse when a rare thunderstorm struck back home. So this was my only point of reference as regards thunderstorms. We would sit around our real fire in the darkness and toast bread on kitchen forks elongated by being tied with a piece of string to the end of a stick or the poker. This was much love amusement that as a child greatly pacified me in the power cut that always accompanied our Irish thunderstorms. Maybe London thunderstorms were different, less deadly, or maybe, just maybe, London was indeed the most sophisticated, advanced city of the world, and the normal rules simply did not apply. Or maybe it was just the rules I was used to did not apply here in this new city and new world that I now inhabited. Maybe I was going to learn a whole new set of rules. Perhaps there was something in the human souls that lived in this wonderful capital that said nothing but nothing stops us. It is the possibility of having a dream come true that makes life interesting. Paulo Coelho, author of The Alchemist. Happiness is a combination of self-discipline and self-responsibility in doing what you love and want. In other words, dedication in being true to your heart. It felt good, in fact, to be normal, one of the crowd, to fit in, as opposed to being someone with an image and a class and a religion to uphold. I was now a refugee almost, just off the boat, an Irish immigrant, to be exact. This was the label that then applied to me. I was not sure how I felt about that. It wasn't such a respected nor enviable place to be compared with upper middle class Protestant farmer's daughter. but because I was where I wanted to be, i.e., with the man I loved, in our own little rented place, with our own money honestly earned. I knew I was in a space that I loved, regardless of any silly label that had been put on me by God only knows who. I had taken a step inward and upward in my world, even though others would think it was a step downward. These dualities were reconcilable for me just by being aware of them and the absurdity of man's obsession for categorizing people, things, and situations. I had taken a step inwards because my actions showed that I had sworn allegiance to my feelings and that still small voice within. I had taken a step upwards because I had done what was right and true for me. I was proud of that and still am. The independence of earning my own money was great, and even though it was poverty level, it did nothing to dull the dream. It was simply life giving me lovely new experiences every moment of every day as I took in my very new and very different surroundings. I was free of my parents. I was with the man I loved, and this society accepted both of us without batting an eyelid. And the religion thing, well, in a cosmopolitan city like London, with Jews, Arabs, Muslims, and Hindus residing there, who cares if two Protestant and Catholic kids live together? For the first time in my life, I saw all religions and nationalities in the world melting and merging into a type of harmony. It was like what I had always known was indeed true, that every human being could get along, or at least avoid someone they intensely disliked, as opposed to killing or oppressing them. How could people be afraid of this golden city and its golden life mysteriously hidden in the ordinary? An ordinary day in London meant sharing a tube carriage with maybe 15 different nationalities. To me, that is spectacular. In a pub, you could talk with the Australians, French, Spanish, Indians, Africans, or Russians, Protestant and Catholic, Jew and Muslim, representatives of warring nations all under one roof, having a pint. Serb and Albanian would end up working in the same restaurant, waiting tables for a pittance, where the immigration office became the enemy, no longer each other. What a world, what beauty, what tragic beauty to see the momentous lessons laid out before our young eyes to be absorbed and learnt. And in due course, in the heart blossoms the realization that we are all one humanity and that having a good time might just be the most important thing, seeing as we all might get deported tomorrow, except the Irish. Quote from Osho: "Man is full when he is in tune with the universe. If he is not in tune with the universe, then he is empty, utterly empty. And out of that emptiness comes greed." End of quote. Reflections on what's left behind. Maybe my parents were not afraid of London, but were afraid of me no longer being around, for that meant they would be left with their own unresolved pain. After all, it causes a problem when the family scapegoat escapes, even if no one realised or acknowledged that that was exactly what had happened in my departure. Why did I get the uneasy feeling that me being me was a deeply uncomfortable issue for them? Why did my success bother them more than my failure? Was it because they could not dictate to a success? Was my going for my dreams and following my heart unsettling because they simply had not bothered to follow theirs? When one sacrifices one's dreams and heartfelt longings, does one not become out of tune with the inner and outer world, and as a result tends to become dictator like, a control freak to each and everything? And then along comes a one that is totally in tune and in harmony with existence. Does that not shake you to your very core? A person who is in tune with existence is a success, in my opinion. Once that inner and outer harmony, that ease with oneself, is established as modus operandi, so to speak, one is not so easy to manipulate or control. Family members, government, society, and spouses all sense this. A wife who has the inner power can leave an abusive relationship, whether she is rich or poor. A wife who brings home a good wage is financially able to leave a wayward husband. But is she emotionally able to do so? Are these the new taboos in society? How much does women's financial dependence on their husbands and lack of inner strength cause them to stay in an unhappy marriage? To me, these are the main reasons that only a generation ago, separation for Irish couples was unheard of. That, and also the enormous sway of the Catholic Church's views on divorce, made it not even an option for generations of Irish men and women. When I was 20, just before I moved to London, I was scared. I thought I'd be mugged. I thought London would be a very violent city. I thought the first thing I'm going to do when I get there is buy a big dog so I'll be safe. 20 years later, I never did get that dog, and I've never been mugged. So, what did I find instead of the anticipated violence? Well, I found lots and lots and lots of different people, none of whom intent on mugging me, surprisingly enough. People with whom I'd worked or studied and became friends with, some of whom I counselled and helped, some of whom counselled and helped me. Most importantly, I found myself. I found glorious sunshine that my fair Irish complexion would soon get used to. I realised that we Irish are the fairest of the races, as I noticed the many different shades of skin and features in the African, Indian, and Sri Lankan faces. I experienced the incredible warmth of the spirituality that simply exudes from the Sri Lankan soul. I felt my brothers and sisters to be of every race and creed in the world. I found a choice of religions available as I chanted with my Buddhist friend who had been born a Jew. I advised English, Scottish, Irish, black and white, African, Indian, South African, and Saudi Arabian, very rich and very poor women in overcoming compulsive eating. And before I became a therapist, I went to college and gasped in wonder at the room full of electronic typewriters that were freely available for us unemployed people to use to learn to type, which came in useful some 5 years later, as it was then that I started writing my books. To this day, I am grateful that I entered Hammersmith's Community College for that basic secretarial skills course. We got £10 a week travelling expenses, which was £10 a week in my pocket, seeing as I cycled everywhere on my much repainted old bike that had meant free travel for me, not to mention enjoyment, as I love cycling. I had been rather annoyed when the brand new £100 black racer that I'd saved hard for and treated myself to was promptly stolen after about 6 weeks of use. Well, it was London. But restoration does indeed happen in the most unusual ways. And whilst looking out our third floor window one morning, I noticed an old gent's bike had been placed on top of a skip load of rubble outside our house. I felt like Santa had been. Column hauled the bike up the 3 flights of Victorian stairs to our room, and on closer inspection, it was deemed roadworthy. I purchased a shopping basket for the front and some mudguards later on. My life had just been made easier. But I digress. Community college in our class consisted of an Indian lady who was happily married with a couple of kids, and one day pencil sketched a portrait of me during a bookkeeping class. It was lovely, a real likeness. I kept it until it got too tattered to keep. Our class also consisted of an unmarried mother who was living in a local hostel with her kids, awaiting council housing because her ex had beaten her. A level-headed Irish woman, a small skinny black woman, who was incredibly quiet due to, we later concluded, copious amounts of pot. A young woman in a wheelchair who assured us she was not an invalid but temporarily wheelchair bound because of a car accident. She lived in a halfway house because she was overcoming heroin addiction and prostitution. And me, a trendy young Irish woman, smoking roll your own fags and wearing Givenchy perfume, having an affair on the side with a delicious young Greek because the Irish boyfriend had confessed to sleeping with a German woman, and in his Irish spurt of wisdom had decided that not having sex at all would be the best way to deal with the situation. After 3 months of this enforced celibacy, I decided I did not like it. I did not like it at all. And on New Year's Eve, after spending a week drinking and smoking and climbing mountains in northern Spain with my friends, a Spanish couple whom I had met in the canteen of the Royal College of Music, I met and fell in love with my Greek Adonis. Cool. Meeting in Covent Garden and spending nights in his grandmother's flat on Charing Cross Road. Despite after our first night together, his grandmother threatening to cut off my toes. The threat was made in Greek. When my head was under the duvet, my toes were obviously sticking out. So luckily I didn't understand until Andy translated for me. And even with the eventual punch in the face that Colm gave me, I never regretted the affair. I would have liked to have punched him back for sleeping with the German, but he was bigger than me. If we watched ourselves and our emotions and our actions like we watch TV, we would have a new life, a life to match the greatest of epic movies. About 1 year later, I enjoyed following up on my interest in painting and drawing at a community-run art class down Old Brompton Road. Meeting English middle-class women, hippie types and single mothers, young and old artists with talent far exceeding my own humble artistic efforts. One day, my teacher encouraged me to make more room for myself and my art supplies while we were while one day my teacher encouraging me to make more room for myself and my art supplies, which were placed on the table as I was attempting to start my painting. I felt as though he had just said, "It's okay to take up space in the world." It's a moment I will never forget. A teacher, a society, a country not my own, willing to accept and help me. Was that as a direct result of my having somehow, on an inner level, accepted and helped myself to a greater degree? No doubt, yes. The sunshine prevailed, and I allowed myself to grow and travel and have boyfriends, as Colm had left me with a broken heart, the German woman, and a yearning that comes from unrequited love. I also allowed myself to accept who I am. While I evolved who I was, I allowed myself a little life, along with a little alcohol and pot to dull the pain. Therefore, a little fun, a little expansion and relaxation was forced into my 24-year-old mind. Life was pushing me along, and authenticity was also being born. By the autumn of my 25th year, my catering job at Sloane Avenue, Delhi, came to an end, and I was unemployed again. Surprisingly enough, though, I discovered that I had been on such a low wage that I actually had £10 a week extra now that I was out of work. After the initial shock of not having the familiar routine of a job to go to, I realised I was being thrown into the unknown yet again, and a new beginning might be emerging for me if I allowed it and went with the flow of this new and very probably positive life current. It was then that I was given a book by a friend, who, even though Colm and I had broken up, had nonetheless recognised my codependent traits. Just as fat is a feminist issue had showed me how my eating habits had been an addiction and how my getting in tune with my feelings and resolving my emotional issues was to be my healing formula, Women Who Love Too Much by Robin Norwood showed me how my patterns in my relationship with Colin had also been an addiction. I had never realized that a person could be the object of your addiction, but here it was explained to me so clearly that there could be no mistaking it. Addiction had indeed reared its ugly head in my life yet again. And now, with the clarity that true knowledge brings, I had the power to conquer another facet of this monster. The escape formula was the same as the formula for giving up compulsive eating and bulimia: get in tune with my feelings and resolve my emotional issues, along with raising my self acceptance. It was like a cool, refreshing drink of much needed water. Even when I'd been in the throes of breaking up with Colin, the pain I knew to be too much was not only to do with those present moment breakup issues of rejection and betrayal, but also to do with all those other past moments of rejection and betrayal, long forgotten from childhood. In other words, the emotional biggies were surfacing. Yet I knew I simply did not have the tools at that time to heal them. Here now in my hands, life had just given me my first tool to heal the pain of those emotional biggies that I had been feeling on and off for years, sometimes suppressing through drinking and smoking, and sometimes allowing myself to feel. And after thankfully devouring Women Who Love Too Much, I noticed in the back section of the book a list of recommended reading. I copied out that list and cycled to Waterstones in Camden, North London, where I handed my list to the sales assistant behind the desk. I asked him if he had any of the books on that list. He consulted his computer and told me there was only one book on the list that he could get hold of for me, and he would have to order it from America. There would be a wait of a few weeks. Which book is that? I inquired. The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity by Catherine Ponder, came the reply. Several weeks later, I had a note through the post telling me that my brand new copy of The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity was waiting for me in Waterstones, Camden. I went to pick it up. This proved to be another book that would further propel my life along in a positive direction. Written by a petite white woman living in 1950s in Alabama, America's Deep South, when she was widowed with a young son to raise. The book shows how she prayed her way out of that situation to become a writer, lecturer, and minister in the Unity faith. And thus was my introduction to positive thinking. How changing one's negative thoughts can change one's reality into a more positive and likable one. About the same time, I started to frequent the local library and there found a book called A Course in Miracles. Wow, if an unemployed 25-year-old, broke Irish immigrant with neither boyfriend nor qualifications ever needed a miracle, I did. I began to study these two books and I loved them. So, on contemplating what to do with the next 40 or so years of my life, I read the words of Catherine Ponder, which basically told me that I could do what I loved to do. It was never too late, and there is always a way to fulfill your dreams. Lovely words. Well, what were my dreams? I wasn't sure I could remember. Then, as I sat in Wood Green Library, North London, I thought of my initial recovery from compulsive eating and how I used to love browsing through the town's second-hand bookshop and therein finding books on weird and wonderful subjects such as yoga, feminism, and the like, and how much I had absolutely adored Fat is a Feminist Issue by Susie Orbach. I had literally studied that book, even memorizing passages and putting the theory into practice until I was no longer obsessed with my size and shape and eating habits. That was it. It was psychology I loved, and writing. Oh, how I loved to write essays at school. And the case histories in Fat is a Feminist Issue made me long to be a therapist. Here it was: be a therapist and writer. Certainly what I yearned to do laid out before me. And a great big, "You can't do that," barring my way. But here, in this lovely book written by an unqualified single mother in 1950s Alabama, I was given a key. She quietly and firmly said, "You can do it. You can do it, even if it's against the odds. You can do it. Even if you don't have any money, you can do it. Even if you don't feel up to it, you can do it. Just take a small step in the direction of your dreams and see what happens." So I wrote a letter to the Women's Therapy Centre in Holloway Road, North London, the centre founded in the 70s by Susie Orbach, the author of Fat is a Feminist Issue, asking them if there was any possibility that they could use my skills of having already overcome my own eating disorder in the work helping overweight women lose excess weight and heal. The therapist called me for an interview. I went, and I never felt so listened to in my whole life. Then she told me that I had indeed recovered from my eating disorder and suggested that I sat in on their 9-month support group to see how they worked, and maybe at the end of those 9 months set up my own support groups. I blissfully floated down the road and made my way to Russell Square, where I walked into the Mary Ward Centre and joined another two support groups, one entitled Women Who Love Too Much, the other Attitudinal Healing, run by 70-year-old Monica Askey and based on A Course in Miracles. I was going to learn as much as I could about the dynamics of food and relationship addiction and how to heal them and pass on that knowledge to others. I'd found my life's work. I was overjoyed. I swore to myself that never again would addiction take over my life. Addiction was the modern day slavery, and I was in training for the battle cry, "Let my people go." End of chapter 2. My Life, My Way. You Gotta Dig Deep in Order to Blossom by Sophia Bothwell. Available from Amazon and Lulu Online Publishing.